Hi there, welcome to Boxing Deep Dive. I'm Lyndon Hosking and great to have you along for another episode of Classic Fights. This is where we go back in time and pick out some special fights of the past and go over what made them special and who better to do it with than these two guys. Grant Tassie Brown and the walking boxing encyclopedia himself, Mike Altamura. How are we, guys?
I'm good, thanks, Lyndon.
And Mike, your internet's not overly great, but at least we can hear you. That's the main thing.
At least it's working. It wasn't working 20 minutes ago. So, yeah, I'm glad to see both your faces. And
hey, Mikey, remember back in the WWE, there was a guy formerly known as Goldust?
Yeah.
I want to be known as formerly the king of the quiz.
Formerly. Well, you never know. You might get another chance.
I want to be known as the king of the quiz.
I don't think Pete's coming back to this program ever.
No, I think.
We know why you don't want any, Bar. I mean, we already clarified that.
Yeah, I don't have energy. I'll research 5 times. I'll smash you 5 times, and then you'll run me over however many times it takes to go one quiz ahead of me, and then you'll brag for the next 30 years. So
I've got a bit of an idea though, guys. This might be a different form of quiz because I've got a feeling that Tassie might be a bit quicker on the draw than you, Mike. But it doesn't mean he knows more. He's just quicker on the draw. So it might be a matter of maybe what it could be is 10 questions each from the errors, from the 10s to the 20s to the 30s and the 40s, and you've got to see how many you can get out of 10.
Not how it works.
Tassie wants to sail the century type challenge.
That's right. And Mikey, I might start hanging around. If you did beat me, I'll start hanging around the Greensboro fucking milk bar to get that fucking revenge.
I know. That's why I'm not giving you no opportunity. Yeah. It's all lose for me. People are going to just automatically assume that I'll find a way to beat Tassie because, look, let's face it, Tassie's a bit rough around the edges, but his boxing knowledge is pristine.
It is.
And that's what, maybe people underestimate a little bit, but I definitely ain't. Whereas, me, they perceive me to have a bit more of a quote-unquote cleaner image. I think, Tassie could unravel all of that. You could see an Anthony Joshua outburst.
A meltdown.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, look, that's obviously in another show that we do, of course, the Boxing Deep Dive show, out every Friday morning, if you will. On to this episode, guys, and obviously this program, Classic Fights. Now, I've got something a little bit different this week, and I've been really looking forward to it because it made me go back and watch all the highlights of the whole thing. And it wasn't you, Michael. I think it was you, wasn't it, Tassie? Yep. So, Tassie, reveal who we've got first, mate, and then we can go into all the particulars.
We're going back to 1948, mate. It was Willie PEP and the classic 4 bouts with Sandy Sadler. 4
fights. Now, I must admit, I only thought they fought 3 times, I must admit. So, actually, when we went back to the sliders, I actually initially had the trilogy on there. And when I was going through Box Rec, I was like, hang on, they fought a 4th time. And, of course, doing some more research, I saw they did obviously fight 4 times. So, hence the series. So, Tassie, before we let Mike come in with a lot of the info as well, mate, why did you pick this fight and what was so great about it?
I think Mike's choice last week sort of got me thinking about back in the olden, which I always do give love to the fighters that made it all possible for the next generation. But I mean, you got Willie PEP, arguably probably the greatest featherweight of all time. Won a round, famously known for winning the round without throwing a punch. Just great defensive wizard. And he's was in my top 10 pound for pound. And like Mike mentioned as well last week, Sandy Sadler, very underrated for what a great fighter he was, and what a dominant fighter. And I mean, Willie PEP was 134 1-1 before this fight. So, and then you got Sandy Sadler, who just amazing fighters, mate. And these two guys are arguably 2 of the greatest of all time, and they had a great series of fights. I really wanted to touch on that and educate our viewers on Willie PEP and Sandy Sadler.
Well, that's what we're here for. And Mike, Tassie just said both, well, probably not both of them. Willie PEP's obviously universally known as one of the greatest, but Sandy Sadler was underrated. But this whole series was actually a little bit underrated, wasn't it? Because it doesn't really get spoken about, in the annals of history as being a classic series, does it? In comparison to a lot of other series of fights.
I think it's because of how a few of the bouts concluded. I don't want to give any spoilers away in advance, but their second bout was a Ring Magazine Fight of the Year for what it's worth. So at least, that kind of is etched in history. But I think that what's interesting in this fight, when you look at both guys stylistically, and just to make a note, going into this first outing, which just bringing up the date, 29th of October 1948, World Featherweight title, Sadler was 86-6-2 going into the bout. Imagine having 94 fights before you finally earn a crack at the world champion. Just a completely different era.
Crazy.
But what's interesting in this bout is, I think, kind of historically in boxing, we equate the taller fighter as being the boxer and the shorter guy as being the puncher. Whereas this was one of those rare occasions. Sadler, arguably one of the 10 greatest punchers in boxing history. 5'8", featherweight, very tall, very wiry frame. You look at it, for people modern era, might remind you a bit of Aguayo, Tommy Hearns, that kind of physique. Willie Pep was shorter. Willie Pep was around 5'4", 5'5", but was a clever boxer mover. So it's just how his style was going to match up with Sadler, because although Pep, had considerable speed advantages, how's he going to match up knowing he's got to take risks and get inside and out and slip and slide and make Sadler miss in order to make him pay?
So Tassie, as you said, Pep was 134-1-1, an unbelievable record, and as Mike said, 86-6-2 for Sadler. Just as we're talking, we'll get the highlights going. There's obviously 4 fights to get through. I can only find footage of 3 fights, by the way, so I've just sort of made a bit of a loop of all of them sort of put together. So, Tassie, this is fight number 1, as one of you said, October 29th, 1948, Madison Square Garden for the World Featherweight title. Talk us through the first fight.
Yeah, well, this was actually won by knockout in the 4th round by Sandy Sadler. So he, which was probably an upset at the time, and he dethroned the great Willie Pep. Like we said, only had the one loss in 35 bouts. So Sadler had that power that Mike mentioned, and that reach and that length, and it was probably you probably would call it to be an upset, I guess.
So, Mike, I'm pretty sure this might be the second fight, if I'm not wrong, I think, but it'll come up anyway at the end of it. But, Pep was really known as that defensive master, wasn't he? And I think, I think Tassie might have said, he actually famously won a round by not throwing a punch, just a master. And I think he was quoted as saying that he was told as a youngster that, obviously hit and don't get hit, and that's what he modelled his career on, and just simply a defensive mastermind, wasn't he?
Oh, look at how quickly he's slipping there. He moving, shifting in between the punches, switching stances, never off balance. Just, if you want to watch a fighter historically who still holds up today and who has adept footwork and niftiness with hand, feet, skills, slipping, catching, countering, Willie Pep had a little bit of everything. He wasn't a puncher. His win rate was at just a touch over 25% knockout ratio when he won. But this is what he did exceptionally well. And you see there, Sadler getting quite frustrated, understandable. But, Willie probably, as well as anyone historically, I think, could switch stances mid-stance. He was a conventional orthodox, but he would switch stances to throw the right hook sometimes, or catch it. See right there, catches him with a leaping hook and then ends up southpaw, works his way out of there back to his stance, and did it seamlessly. Very rarely paid a price when he was in between switching.
And Tassie, I did read too that Mike Tyson actually modelled a couple of his punches after Sandy Sadler, when he would throw the uppercut or the hook and follow through with the elbow. Tyson admitted to actually using it, and he did say when he was growing up watching all the old tapes that Customato would have given him, that Sandy Sadler was one of the guys he actually modelled his style on.
Yeah, well, I didn't hear that, but Mike Tyson is a real student of the game and was known for watching many tapes from the great Customato, and a real Tyson always talks about the legends of the game, and I like that about Mike. I like that he really, pays homage to the old guys in the generations before. So So I mean, look, obviously, this is the first of the four battles, and I mean, Sadler, was victorious with a fourth round stoppage.
Yeah, so I'm not exactly sure which order I put him in there, guys. I've just sort of put all the highlights together. But as you said, it was a fourth round knockout. We'll just keep moving there. Yeah, sorry, what have I done there? All right, so this is what's the date there? It doesn't actually come up there. World Featherweight Champion. Hasn't got the date. But anyway, so the first fight, Mike, as you said, fourth round knockout. Victory to Sandy Sadler. Fight number 2 happened on February the 11th, 1949, also at Madison Square Garden, again for the World Featherweight title. And this time, the tables were turned.
It's incredible when you think that Pep was crushed in the first bout, knocked out in round 4, and had 2 tune-up bouts leading into this rematch for the world title 4 months later. In the meantime, Sadler had 5 fights. Just think about that. Nowadays, a guy defends a world title and goes missing for 12 months. Sadler had 5 fights in under 4 months leading into this bout. It's just a different level of activity. So sometimes when people go back and look at records historically and see, as Sadler would a number of times in his career, lose fights, 10-round decisions in non-title fights, there's a reason for it. It's because the guy's fighting every other week pretty much.
It's amazing to think, isn't it, Tassie, that and I suppose that's why we tend to sometimes forget how great these fighters were when, we're rating the guys of today who fight once, maybe twice a year. These guys were fighting once, every fortnight. It's amazing to think that was pretty much all they did back then.
100%, mate, and we touched on it a while ago. One of the most recent fighters that was a throwback to these guys was James Toney, who liked to fight regularly because, that's the thing. Like, inactivity kills a fighter. So back then, they fought often. They were always in the gym, always fighting. And I guess obviously always getting paid because back then they needed to make the money too. But I mean, it just shows how different the sport is now. And when people say boxing's evolved, like I touched on last week, it hasn't because, inactivity kills fighters, and too many gaps in between these fights. It's not a good thing.
And I think Mike Tyson was obviously another one who learned from history because when he first started, I think he fought 15 times or something in the first year. So he obviously didn't just mirror Sandy Sadler's style; he actually mirrored his active or activeness, if that's a word, in his career.
Well, his management, which was Bill Caden, and who was his Jimmy Jacobs?
Jimmy Jacobs, yeah.
So Bill Caden and Jim Jacobs actually owned all of these archives. So the fight we're watching right now is a bout that would have come out of their collection. So essentially, when the mob handed over, footage and things like that, it was all sold off from one property to the next, and eventually wound up in the hands of Caden and Jacobs. So that's why Tyson was, I guess, disposed to watching all these classic fights in an era where it was a lot trickier to find footage. And I think that those guys, educated in understanding that system, knew that it would only serve him well to be active.
Well, the second fight was won by Willie Pep. Again, I'm not quite sure exactly what fight we're watching here. I just sort of put them all together rather than sort of go fight by fight. But Willie Pep won the second fight, 145, 140, 145, 141, and 144, 141. So a clear-cut 15-round decision. But Tassie, fight number 3, September 8th, 1950. This time it was at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. Again for the World Featherweight title. And again, the tables were turned.
Yeah, I know. They were obviously one each after Pep got revenge. But in this one, there was a bit of a thing where Pep actually dislocated his shoulder and had to quit in round 8. So it was declared as a TKO to Sadler.
And I think, Mike, was it right that Willie Pep was actually in front when he had to retire?
Yeah, so in the third fight, Pep was boxing quite well and was likely headed to a decision victory. It was frustrating making some of them miss frequently, but obviously with the injury, the crazy part is, we think of these throwback fighters and respect their hardness, but in 2022, if a fighter pulled out with a dislocated shoulder, they'd be getting berated on social media. Whereas back then it was just accepted that he couldn't continue in the fight and would live to fight another day. But that's kind of just a little bit of an interesting fact historically when you look at it. That was actually, I think the footage that was just shown previously was their final bout. So
okay.
this may actually be their second bout right here.
Yeah.
Just gauging off of Pep's footwork anyways. He just looks a little niftier and a little fresher, whereas their final bout was a mauling, ugly affair, which Sadler won when Pep was unable to come out for round 10. But it's been considered one of the most foul-filled and ugliest fights in boxing history, which is probably why people don't traditionally remember that they fought 4 times. Lyndon, you said you thought they only fought 3. They maybe should have, because it would have erased that third fight. But the other thing you're seeing here as well, and this is why I respect Pep so much. I mean, when you've been flattened by a guy and then had so many trouble moments to keep saddling it up, literally, and going back and fighting him with, strength disadvantages, height disadvantages, but just different kind of makeup and era. And I think that, maybe a little unfair to Sandy Sadler, but of their 4 bouts, the one that I recall the most was the brilliance of Willie Pep in the rematch to turn the clock back and outbox him and avenge that loss.
Tazzy, normally when you watch these old type of fights, you sort of look at them going, geez, how the hell would they have stood up against today's fighters? But looking at these 2 guys here, you could actually see both of these fitting into this era no problem at all, even withstanding all the technology and conditioning and nutrition and all that we have these days. But you can see Willie Pep in there and Sandy Sadler in there because he looks a lot like Tommy Hearns, I've got to say. But you can see these guys are slipping straight into modern day boxing, can't you?
Yeah, I know what you mean, Linda. When you mentioned that, 100%. These guys, you can just see how great they were, and no fighter from today would live up to these guys.
Well, Mike, the 4th fight, as you spoke about, was a real rough and tough affair. I think even the referee said it was pretty much a disgrace of a fight. He could have pretty much disqualified both of them. I think Sandy Sadler might have had a point or 2 taken off. And again, Willie Pep ahead on points, retired after the 9th round with a perceived injury.
Yeah, just a shame that I think for both of them, I think it almost detracted a little bit from Sadler's legacy that after the second bout in which Pep avenged defeat, the next 2 were kind of injury withdrawals in the corner rather than, say, a points victory or a stoppage scored by Sadler within the context of the fight and not just a corner retirement. I think that it shouldn't have, but it almost detracted a little bit from what he achieved because Pep was leading both of those contests.
Yeah.
But the other thing you might be looking at here and thinking is, Sadler sure looks awfully big at this weight. Well, he beat, it's either 4 or 5 lightweight world champions throughout his career. He never actually contested or captured the lightweight world title, but he beat Joe Brown. He beat Paddy DeMarco 1 out of 3. He beat Jimmy Carter. He fought the absolute best fighters of his era over a number of weight classes, and that's something that can't be discounted. And I think that, when you look at, say, I know you put a lot of credence, Lyndon, in the International Boxing Hall of Fame in Canastota.
Yep.
Both these guys were in the inaugural class of 1990, so 1990, that's in how high a regard historically they're viewed.
Yeah, well, I was just going to bring that up, actually. Yeah, Tassie, it's amazing, like Mike just said then, that the International Boxing Hall of Fame first induction was 1990, and these 2 were just straight in. So obviously it's a sign of how great these guys were.
Mate, as I said, I've mentioned on here many times how I'm a 3rd generation boxer. My grandfather and his 4 brothers all fought. My father and I think his 5 first cousins all fought. And I was the first and third generation, and my 2 younger cousins fought as well. I remember listening to my grandfather and my dad about Willie Pep, Sandy Sadler, all the greats, and as I said, heard about these guys many a time. Again, I go back to my grandfather liking the boxer, liking Willie Pep, my dad liking the fighter. I keep mentioning this, guys, because it's true. This was my conversation as a kid. Dinner time every night was this. This was my life. That's why I love the sport so much. Mike has an association with his father in boxing. That's why he loves the sport so much. Like and I guess still talking about it now draws me back to those times. And who doesn't want to go back and remember a time when you're sitting there with 2 men who you loved that aren't with you anymore? So it's a good So talking. This was it, Lyndon. This was all these guys.
Yeah.
That's why I beat Kenny Maniatis in the quiz, because I was doing this stuff from the age of Dot.
Well, he was out wearing Versace suits. You were studying the boxing game.
100%, brother. He was probably eating baklava with the Greek baklava. Oh, he's a legend. Good on you, Pete. Love you, mate.
Well, look, that was a great pick, mate. I really enjoyed that. As I said, it made me sort of go back and revisit it and do a little bit more research into it. So, if you haven't seen the fights, as I said, I can only find 3 of them on YouTube. But maybe if you delve a little bit deeper, it might be under there. But
Mike might have it. He's got pretty much.
Yeah, Mike, you've probably got it.
He's got all sorts of videos, Mike has.
So I have actually like a few rare fights in Sadler's career too.
Okay.
Like towards the tail end, non-title fights where he dropped decisions. And it's interesting because I feel like fighters in that era, rightfully, historically, it's just kind of forgotten when they were outworked or beaten, when they were a little bit flat in just like a tune-up fight. And you see it even with Sugar Ray Robinson. You know, no one holds Sugar Ray Robinson losing to Ralph Tiger Jones against him historically. He's still rated the greatest fighter ever. And I think that, you know, for any of our audience that's going to go back and watch these fights, just understand the context of how these guys fought. It wasn't like now that you spar 100, 150 rounds for one 10-round bout and then you sit on the shelf for 4 or 5 months. These guys weren't really sparring too much. They were more drilling and that, and then fighting every 3 weeks. So anyone that's been a fighter will know you have your great spars, you have your little bit of a flat or an ordinary spar. These guys on their records didn't necessarily have those liberties because they were saddling up every few weeks and needing to throw down. And the reason I'm making this point is when you look at Willie Pep, and keep in mind that there was a plane accident too, which essentially was it about 9 months from his career once he recovered from it, and he lost a bit of mobility from that. But when you see that in that era of fighting, that Willie Pep was able to go 134 1-1, and it only lost to Sammy Angot, who was the lightweight world champion, so physically a much bigger guy, because as you can see with Pep off this video, wasn't a big featherweight.
Yeah.
It just shows you why you got to respect a fighter like him and consider him top 10 greatest fighters of all time, because that context matters.
Well, I think we're going to have to definitely feature these guys in future dream fights. I think there's plenty of featherweights that we can match them up with anyway, I think so. But yeah, so a great pick there, Tassie. Now it's back to me, I think. Is that right? I think it is?
Yeah.
Yeah, it is, yeah. I'm going to go for a fight that could almost be a series, but I'm just going to pick the one fight. I'm surprised it actually hasn't been brought up yet. I'm referring to quite simply the fight of the century, Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier, number 1. Probably could have number 3 in there as well if we wanted to, not so much number 2. So I think we're going to stick to, I think, at that stage was probably the biggest fight in history, I think, Mike. You can probably correct me if I'm wrong, but Ali Frazier won. Plenty of info to go into what made the fight happen and the lead up and the aftermath and obviously the fight itself. So much that we can relive. So I'm looking forward to doing that one. So that'll be Ali Frazier 1 next week. But Tassie, mate, I really like the fact that you've brought up a fight that our younger viewers out there, maybe not even the younger ones, maybe people just haven't seen this one before. Make sure you check it out. It's on YouTube, or all these fights on YouTube, and just the highlights of these guys themselves, because they were just legends of the sport.
Yeah, that's the thing, Leonard. So not just the fight, but individually on both guys, because they both, had their own careers, even though they fought each other. But they're both separately two of the greatest, you know what I mean? So, but they happen to fight each other, obviously. But I mean, it's So look, that's the thing. Like, we want to educate everyone, because I mean, you got to know where you started in life before you know where you're going to go, and you got to appreciate the fighters before now. So yeah.
Yeah, good stuff, mate. All right, well, that was Pep Sadler, the series. Check it out. Again, guys, thanks very much for being on, and everyone out there obviously tuning in. And look forward to Ali Fraser 1 next week on Classic Fights.